Hi, welcome to this really exciting webinar on global button battery requirements. Even using that term actually makes me think it's button and coin as well, but we'll explain that a little bit too. So my name is Geraldine Koch and we've got the lovely Bill Baxter here today. This is really going to be a discussion, isn't it, Bill? We've been discussing this for quite some
Yes, it
time, so
is.
I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really looking forward to the comments that we're going to get. And the maybe clarifications or questions. So please do be as interactive as possible. We will introduce ourselves a bit more, but just really quickly, actively participate. Please actively participate. I know if you're watching this back on a recording, please contact us at ICW and we can answer any questions perhaps. These are being recorded, these webinars, so they will be available after, and you will get a questionnaire that automatically pops up at the end. Really, really useful for us to get your feedback, maybe on topics you want us to discuss or do presentations on. That'd be really useful. Any queries you've got, the email's on there, and then in future the webinars will be on the website. I'm assuming that most of you have been here before and you would have seen this before, so that's great, and welcome back if you've been here before. Okay, so really briefly, if you've attended previous webinars, you might have seen Bill and I. You most certainly probably would have seen myself. My name is Geraldine Koch. Just really quickly, I'm a product safety consultant based in London, in the United Kingdom. I work with ICW as a business development consultant, been working in product safety for 20 years. Just some recent specific activities. So I was the technical author of PAS 7055, which we'll talk about today. Also PAS 7100 and 7050, and I've also worked on a few other projects that are mentioned here on the slide. I do want to mention the BCCPS, so the Business Certificate of Competency in Product Safety. This is an amazing training session that you can attend, and if you're interested, then contact us. But Bill, over to you to introduce yourself.
I'm Bill Baxter. I have been a product safety consultant for the past 15 years. And before that, I was in design and development of children's products. So I have about 25 years of experience in the overall consumer products industry, but have been dealing with regulations and helping small to mid-sized companies deal with their compliance and regulatory challenges since 2019.
And it's
So
challenging,
that's a
right? It
little bit
keeps
of
getting challenging. Yeah.
it keeps changing and growing every year.
Yeah, exactly. So we're busy, right, Bill? And hopefully we're going to help here with this webinar and help discuss and clarify a few things, because we know it's a bit challenging, these requirements. So, and it's an honor to be here with you today, Bill. Okay, so really quickly before we get into the specifics, who are ICW and what do they do? I'm going to try and keep it really quick and to the point, but ICW is a pioneer in digitizing testing and inspection and certification, and they have some amazing tools which dramatically help me. I don't know about anybody else at the moment, but the one thing that is so precious to me is my time. And if I can save time doing things, and I think that's why people probably enjoy working with both Bill and I and the ICW team, because we may be able to do something quicker when it comes to product safety than other people. Everyone has different expertise or things they like doing. We thoroughly enjoy product safety, which is unique, can be unique. But if someone can save you time, it's really, really important. And that's what ICW does with their systems. They have a number of tools available. The team is phenomenal. I speak to them now on a daily basis, asking them queries about testing or perhaps getting quotes. And they are invaluable in terms of my network, just as Bill is if I have queries about the US, etc. So they have a number of tools that can really help simplify your product compliance, your safety as well, and compliance processes. So if you have any questions, then please let us know. Wherever you are based in the world, we can have a conversation with you and let you know more about the tools and perhaps provide a demonstration for you. But it's phenomenal, the system that they have. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the webinar chat. Can people say hello? Feeling a bit lonely here, Bill, like we're the only ones, which is fine because I love hanging out with Bill. But if you want to just put in the chat a hello so I can check it's working, that would be really good. Oh, there we go. Someone's saying hello. Brilliant.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
hoping for lots of questions throughout this session. We want to make sure that we help you, right? So
Absolutely.
I'm Yeah, I'm going to start and then I'll hand over to Bill and then we'll have a bit of a discussion. But what are we going to cover? We've only got 45 minutes, which is a real challenge for Bill and I to try and get this. I did say it to someone the other day and he was like, wow, that's going to take 2 days to simplify that. And I feel like it probably is, if I'm honest. But we're going to try and cover button versus coin. I think we can do that and explain that really clearly. We're then going to look at
And I
product
think you said the
labeling.
key word right there. We're trying to simplify it and not go into
Exactly.
every little detail.
Exactly. And that's challenging sometimes, right? Because you get so stuck in the detail. I know that I do. And sometimes, and we're like, no, 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 just let's try simplify it for everybody. But everyone will have a different opinion on things. And certainly with point two, Bill is 100% right. The product labeling requirements for GB, EU, USA, Australia, and Canada. And, Bill was explaining, he thinks we've got an idea on something that might satisfy most of these. And I'm like, really? Really? Are we sure? So we will talk about that a bit later on, obviously with some caveats. But we know it's challenging. If you're selling to all of these markets, these requirements for these products are complex, but rightly so. And we will explain in a moment about how important and why it is so important to get these right, because we are protecting consumers. And that's fundamentally, if that's at the heart of everything you do, I think you're winning. You want to make sure that consumers are protected, then I think that's a great position. Now, toys versus non-toys. Bill has a lot of experience in the toy area. We're not going to cover that too much. We could do that on another webinar if you want us to. Put it in the feedback, put it in the chat, let us know. We're going to high level talk about toys. So really, really quickly be covering that in our discussions. And then alignment on the global product requirements, which is, yeah, probably 2 days, but we're going to do it really high level. Questions and answers throughout. Please ask questions. Both Bill and I are very friendly, very knowledgeable. We will try our best to answer your questions. And when they're coming in, I'll have a look and we'll try and answer them at the time, just to make it easier rather than saving it to the end. So please do ask at the time any questions that you have. We'll try our best. If we can't or it's too specific, then we'll contact you later on and we'll have your details. So we'll let you know. Okay, that's the fun that we're going to have today. Okay, so button versus coin. I think that this visual presents it in one way. There's many different ways that we can explain it, but basically, normally when we're looking at button batteries, they're the smaller ones here. They tend to be non-lithium, and that chemistry is really, really important. And some of the legislation has focused quite a lot on that, lithium versus non-lithium. And you can imagine the discussions that you have in steering group committees. I know that Bill's involved in committees and I as well. You can discuss this, forever and go round and round and round. But we'll try and keep it really simple that button tends to be non-lithium. They're the smaller ones. The larger ones are the lithium ones, and they're known as coin due to the shape. You can see here, this has been put in a piece of ham, and after 30 minutes, the damage that it is doing. So the chemical reaction that's occurring, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why Bill and I do what we do. It's about protecting consumers. And unfortunately, too many children have died from ingesting button and coin batteries. And we really want that to stop. Thankfully, the legal requirements in the world are definitely trying to align, but they're definitely getting up there with let's get a law out there. I think the alignment has work to do. And there's some work to do in Europe for sure. So we're going to talk about that. But it's really good that everyone's talking about it. That's my thought. That's my opinion. If people are talking about it, consumers, regulators, businesses, then we're heading in the right direction.
And
So I
it
hope that
speaks
explains
to a
the
piece.
difference. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill. Yeah,
Keep
please.
going. I'll jump back in later when we're talking.
Yeah, please do. Anytime, jump in. This is a great discussion. So just quickly on this, so why? What's the point? So the National Capital Poison Centre estimate there have been 71 reported, and I think the key word here is reported, right, Bill? Because not every one of these things is reported. Sometimes things might happen and we don't know about it. So it's definitely underrepresented here. Fatal button battery ingestions. I want to mention sometimes people say button and they actually include coin in that as well. So most of the time I would assume that that's the case. Sometimes there's differences. That's a staggering amount, 71 reported fatality. So that is why it's so important. And that's not the injuries. The injuries are higher than that, dramatically higher than
On top of that.
Yeah, for sure. So the lithium batteries accounted for 66% of the ones that they know about, 29% for the remainder and were unknown chemistry, and 5% were other chemistry. So this is the challenge, and it tends to be because of the size and the shape and where they become stuck, they can be incredibly hazardous. So when they stay there and the chemical reaction happens, that's where the fatalities can happen. They have still happened from button cell batteries. We know that, we're 100% sure, but they're more likely to happen from lithium and coin. It doesn't mean that the button ones are safe. And that's why there's a distinction sometimes. There's 4 key themes that are coming around when we're having the discussion, and mainly in the PAS 7055, which I'm going to talk about, you'll see there's some themes that we try to discuss, and it's about the legislation and relevant standards. When we started it in 2021, the journey is so complex. There were so many different warnings, so many different labels. And I think the worst thing is confusing consumers, because that's who we're trying to protect. And then there's so many different standards that can test for this. Then you've got packaging, you've got warning, you've got chemistry types, you've got voltage, you've got size, and then the data that's available. In my opinion, on injury data, the best data is in the US, but there is global data, and there's lots of studies that have been done on button and coin ingestion. So let's talk
In
about
that first point on that
Yeah.
slide, hey Geraldine, in that first point, do you know if the 71 reported ingestions were over the course of 1 year or over the course of several?
No, that's quite a significant amount of time. I think, don't quote me on it, it's about 15, 20 years. So it's over a period of time. It's most certainly not over a year. I can confidently answer that, but it's over a period of time. Yeah. So I hope that answers that question. It's a great question. If you go to the National Capital Poison Centre data, or you search on your internet browser fatalities associated with button or coin batteries, that should come up, and you'll be able to see the data line by line. You can see the specific data. Great questions. Okay, so this is the PAS 7055, which was recently updated. And you can see here it's free to download, which I think is always a bonus. Some standards can be incredibly expensive. Things that are out of scope, which tend to be the same in other regions as well, but there are some differences. Things from an environmental perspective, so the recycling type thing. Professional use, zinc air batteries, it's just due to the chemistry. If you want to know more, read up in the documents, it explains more. Manufacturing, toys, audiovisual equipment. So toys are not in scope of PAS 7055 because they're already covered in 62115. That's why, basically. The changes between 2021 and 2024, I'm trying to think, high level, what's important for the people here on this session. There's a lot of changes. You go to the standard, it actually lists them. Most standards they do, they will tell you what's changed. But there was the debate about the chemistry. There was different warnings for lithium versus non-lithium, and that's been merged into one. There was also identified the challenge globally in trying to comply with all of the different requirements. So within PAS 7055, it's trying to allow for flexibility for you to use warnings for different regions, but get a point across to the consumer that's consistent. And that's a challenge. It was a real challenge, trust me, in the steering committee, the steering group on that. But that's some of the key changes that I think is important to mention on that. Just to go through really quickly, this is going to be incredibly fast, so I hope that you're fully awake and you can keep up with me. So you can look at the standard yourself. We're just going to go through some high-level themes. Within PAS 7055, 2025, there's requirements for manufacturers of batteries. So that's specifically getting batteries on their own. That's clause 4, and about child-resistant packaging and the warnings that should be on there. And then there's requirements in clause 5 for manufacturers of consumer products containing batteries. So those products that have the batteries within them, what are the requirements? Well, the battery should be secure. The battery compartment fasteners should remain in place. Non-replaceable batteries, so if you have something where you can't get the batteries out, there's requirements for that. If there's spare or loose batteries with the products, there's information for that. And then on the instructions and manuals, there's specified information that you need to provide the consumer on that. So let's take a look at the warning and information on 5.6. So the marking on the consumer product packaging, the figure 1 here, I just want to highlight something. This is an example of a combination. It's an example of a combination and kind of considered the minimum that you should have in there. So getting the message across to the consumers. So the information in there is an example. And then it talks about here you can see the packaging of consumer products that contain batteries shall include the text and there's specified information about the contrasting colours, etc. If the battery compartment does not close securely, stop using the product. And I have a product here that I use to open my blind. Sounds very fancy, but the mechanism here, it comes out really easily because over time, opening and closing, you know, it's not secure anymore. And it's really important that the consumers are aware of that. Then the marking on the product itself, and there is information about there, you know, if there's not room, etc. But have a look at your product. You know, try your best to get as much information as you can because we're trying to let consumers know this consistent message that it contains a coin or button battery. So there is criteria about that, about it being indelible, and you can test it, and there's criteria you rub it, etc., to make sure it doesn't come off. So it's important it remains there throughout the life cycle of the product. And then finally, there's information for distributors. So what you should put point of sale in the store, online, and disposal. I must admit, I'm a little bit disappointed because in the stores I've been here in London, I've not actually seen this information, but they have looked at the disposal for sure, and you know the bins that you can put in, etc. But the more information we give consumers, I think is, you know, the better, because it's not one person's problem. This is consumers, regulators, manufacturers, all economic operators. We all need to work together and raise awareness on this. Okay. So very quickly, before I pass over to Bill, I'm conscious I think I'm talking too much, so I'm going to try and speed it up. We could talk about this for hours. Sometimes Bill and I do. Does anyone know what's wrong with this picture? We can. So does anyone know what's wrong with this picture? Please put it in the chat. I can see someone on there that I'm sure is going to answer this question. Basically, Great Britain has left Europe. This has caused a bit of complexity. It was years ago, but now we're seeing a divergence, basically. PAS 7055 is only applicable in Great Britain in theory, okay? It doesn't mean if you're based in Europe you can't use it. Of course you can. And in fact, under the new General Product Safety Regulation, it suggests that you look at other requirements elsewhere. So just to highlight that, we've of course got the Batteries Directive, which is coming into Europe, but it's not going to be enforced in GB, but hopefully it will with the legislation. We're going to try and see what happens in the future. But there is divergence basically that's happening. And then in Europe, you do have 62115, which is to do with toys, but you can use it for non-toys, right? There's no rules about you not using it. Fundamentally, make the product safe. You know, think about the consumer and protecting the consumer. And you do have something called harmonized and designated standards, and that gives you a presumption of conformity to the law. So 62115 is that for toys. There isn't anything for button or coin batteries. Nobody's actually guessed what's wrong with that picture.
In some of the harmonized nursery products, I think that's what you call them over there, they have some button cell battery requirements.
True, good point. This is why I work with Bill. See, keeps me on my toes. Exactly, yeah. And I love it. Somebody's put in there that the map about it being in red and Great Britain. Exactly. It's not correct, the map, but I guess those of you that know. And this is a good reason why, because I actually typed into AI, and you might like this, the person that put the chat, I said, make me a map of EU exit, and this is what it came out with. So it was good enough to put in this presentation, but you've always got to check it, right? So 90% correct, but you always need someone to just check over any search that you do on ChatGPT or Copilot, whatever it is that you use. Right, so over to you, Bill.
Well, this next section is going to be ChatGPT and Copilot free. So I am starting in on the requirements in the US, and when we're looking at selling products globally, the US ends up taking sort of a front seat because A, it is a big market, and B, when the US makes rules, they tend to be very, this is the rule you must follow. And it is focused and doesn't usually have a lot of latitude. So a lot of what we are doing to make a global perspective on button cell battery testing and particularly labeling is going to depend a lot on Reese's Law. Well, what's Reese's Law, you ask? Reese's Law is the overarching battery, button cell battery law that covers all consumer products in the US. And it's named in memory of Reese Hamsmith. was passed in law in 2022 and came into effect in 2024. And what it does in a nutshell is it requires all consumer products to take on labeling requirements, physical testing requirements, and requirement and specific instructions requirements. As part of, just jump back one sec though. As part of Reese's Law, instead of making new rules for toys, the law keeps in place the existing F963 toy safety standards. And so that has button cell requirements built in, and they kept it because it has physical requirements that apply to the battery compartment, and it has a labeling requirement on the principal display panel of the box. All right, so now we can move on. So the most important parts of the physical requirements from the perspective of a manufacturer is that the battery compartment, well, first of all, must exist because there are consumer products out there that just have loose button cell batteries attached to an IC board or a chip. And so you must have your battery enclosed with a double action mechanism or a screw that is captured and won't come out of the battery compartment. We're going to talk a little bit about screws later. And then before the testing occurs, you need to be aware that they're going to condition the battery compartment by first heating it either to 70 degrees Celsius or 10 degrees higher than whatever the expected heat is. So if it's already in a high temperature situation, they're going to make it a little bit higher. And then they do battery replacement cycling where they have to put the battery in and take it out at least 10 times. Then they're going to do the physical and mechanical testing. So the physical and mechanical testing is a lot like the toy testing. It's drop tests, torque, crush, tension, and it's essentially beating on the product and trying to see if the battery comes out. And if the battery comes out, you fail. There's also a secureness test, which involves the battery door and using a finger probe to see if you can get into where the battery is. I'm just kind of going through those quickly. The details are all in the UL 4200A, which is the standard that Reese's Law depends on for non-toy consumer products. And that is available from the UL website through their document viewer. So you don't have to pay for that, but it is a little hard to cut and paste out of. It's as if that's intentional. Okay, so the labeling requirements, I mentioned them briefly, but there's three major points. And the first one is that there is a very large, very ugly label required on the front of your box. So it's the principal display panel, which is an idea we have in the US that isn't around the world. And that means that the side of your product that is most likely to be displayed to consumers is the principal display panel. There is a type size requirement, and that's based on the square inches of your principal display panel. So the bigger your box is, the bigger the warning is. And the number one complaint I get from most of my clients is, this is really big and ugly, and it's taking up a quarter of the front of my box. And the only response I'm able to give, thanks to the way this is written, is yes, yes, it is. But it's supposed to be because this is part of the education factor. People don't realize the hazards associated with button cells, and a big warning on the box helps them understand that. We're going to go into a little more detail about the alert symbols. So I'm going to gloss over that at the moment. And then there is also label required on the product itself near the battery door or where the battery door would be in a non-accessible situation. So even if you're not supposed to change the battery, you're still supposed to have a warning close to where the battery would be or visible if the product is opened, so that adults are made aware that there was a button cell or a coin cell battery in the product, and can keep it away from children. In the US, we only allow that yellow triangle symbol on the product when the surface is too small to label. But given that button cells tend to be used in small items, um, it's frequently small enough that there's no arguments about this is small enough to use the symbol. And then finally, there's some required information in the instructions, and this is true across most of the standards we are talking about, that there are instruction requirements, and those are sort of the easiest to deal with because you can always add another warning or another statement. So you can just go through each one of the standards that you're applying and make sure you've caught all of the warnings and statements that are needed for your particular chemistry or size of battery. So under Risa's law, the warning from the PDP gets repeated in the instructions. There is a minimum size for the type of this warning. So that is important. It does not have to be as big as it is on the front of the box, but it does have to be 0.2 inches for the word warning and 0.1 for everything else, all the other words in the warning. If you just used a symbol on the product display panel, right there on the product near the battery door, that triangle needs to be explained as this means warning, there is a coin or button cell battery inside the product. And then finally, just a note, and this is in general about instructions, this text needs to be on the product, in the product somewhere. So instructions are allowed to be on the product, instructions are allowed to be on the outer packaging, instructions are allowed to be on a standalone leaflet. You just have to make sure that all the wording in the instructions is somewhere on the product or in the overall product. All right, so now for the details. The 4200A is very specific about the words that have to be on the product. So the UL 4200A requires exactly the words shown here, and they require exactly the capitalization and the bolding shown here. And the only real difference you get to have is, do you want to use the yellow triangle symbol or the blue circle, keep away from children? We've chosen the blue circle, keep away from children, because that aligns better with the PAWS and aligns better with Australia. So there's at least some nod within the UL Standardization Committee to the idea that we want this to be a global standard. The challenge is that the 4200A only specifies one symbol in this box, and there isn't any clear allowance for using multiple symbols like the PAWS allows. So I mentioned before that your type size is based on the overall principal display panel. The only real nod for smaller packages is that the standard allows you to break up the warning into two panels. So if you look over on the right, if your package is small, you're still required to have a minimum size based on the principal display panel, and that applies to both panels. But the top panel, with the button cell symbol on it, that still needs to go on the principal display panel. And then the other two statements can go in a box anywhere else on another panel on the outside packaging. So it still has to be on the outside, but it's not required to be on the principal display panel. All right, now on the product, you can mark your product in one of two ways. I'm going to say preferred, but I think it's only preferred because it's listed first in the standard, is this orange and white box that is supposed to be on, thank you, Jeffrey, that is on the product near the battery door, or so it is visible whenever you'd be changing the battery, or the triangle and button cell over on the right, which is intended for smaller uses. And as we mentioned, that's going to be frequently the case. And the other thing to note about this symbol is If you're printing it on, you're supposed to do it in yellow, but this symbol is allowed to be engraved right into the plastic. And you want to engrave it so that it's easy to read, but that way you don't need to go through another operation to print or try to find a permanent sticker that will stick to the plastic you've chosen for your product.
That's a
But
great
these
point.
need
I
to be
was
on or near
discussing
the
that.
battery compartment. Oh,
Sorry, that's a great point. I was discussing that with somebody earlier today. That we were debating about the yellow, and I wasn't sure, to be honest. So and it's about consumer awareness, right? Just making sure that they can see that information. So interesting.
yeah. No, agreed completely. And I mean, the standard allows for it also. So that's useful. Um, then the Reese's Law contains a second set of regulations that apply to selling loose batteries in the USA. And you are going to need to either um, make your packaging according to ANSI 18.3, or you have to have packaging that meets the requirements of the Poisoning Prevention Act. And that requires some focus group testing to determine that children can't actually open whatever you have designed. And the main reason I want to bring this up is occasionally people will pack their button cells and coin cells separate from their product outside the battery compartment. And when they do, you need to be aware of this because those are considered loose batteries under Reese's Law, and you might have issues. And then the other thing that is important is anytime you are selling the batteries, you're going to need a general conformity certificate. So let's see. Which brings us to the documentation requirements. I wanted to bring this piece up because if you are not a manufacturer who deals with normally regulated products, like you're not already in the children's product business, you might not be aware that the US has a certification requirement for any product that is subject to a CPSC rule ban or standard, and button cells are now one of those. So if you're bringing in button cells, it either needs to be accompanied by a general certificate of conformity or a children's product certificate, depending on if it's for adults, the GCC, children get the children's product certificate. And this also means that in the fairly near future, any item with a button cell is going to be subject to e-filing, which is another can of worms that we're not going into today, but might be the subject of a future webinar with ICW. Australia has taken more the approach of the pause, where they have set up regulations that are looking to existing standards and looking to existing approaches, but they are mandatory. And so in Australia, what they've done is they've made a physical requirement for consumer products where they make generalized statements about what the product needs to meet. And so if you'll flip to the next one, they must not release during reasonably foreseeable misuse conditions. Children must be unable to open the battery compartment. It must be secure. The compartment must be secured. It can be by screws, and if they're by screws, must remain with the cover. And then they refer to UL 4200A. But if you're already testing your product for Australia, it is possible that the standard you're using covers these 4 points. And so Australia has allowed several standards to act as proof that you have met these 4 points. And they include Australian Electric Toys, which is 62115, and it's aligned with the EU standard. They also allow 4200A, the UL standard that I was talking about for the US. And then some specific lighting standards and information technology standards that address button cell batteries.
I just want to mention here, I think we're going to allude to this later, but they're giving options, and that's what the PAS is doing, is giving options. So the only one that's not giving options is Reese's Law. So I think we just want to let you know about that. But the option in Reese's Law is available in the other one. So for this specific thing.
That also means that if you're manufacturing for, say, Europe and Australia, but the US isn't involved, there might be an easier choice than following all the requirements of the 4200A. So just like in their physical mechanical standards, their actual laws about what's required in the warning are a series of, you must address this requirement, you must address, you must have a safety alert symbol, you must have a keep out of reach of children symbol, statements that if it's lithium, then that can lead to severe burns within 2 hours of ingestion, versus if the battery is non-lithium, then you just need to inform that the battery can cause serious injuries if swallowed or placed inside any part of the body. And then advice to seek medical attention. And if you look at those, they're fairly well aligned with what's required by Reese's Law and what's required by the PAS. So loose batteries work exactly the same way, except the individual standards that are required are different. So it is, you must go to one of their loose battery standards and have testing to that standard, and then appropriate warnings that are similar to the ones required on products. But since that's not really in scope, we're making you aware of them, not delving into loose batteries. So Canada is an interesting case because they have no specific requirements. And I want to be completely clear, that's not because Canada doesn't think this is an issue. That's not because Canada doesn't care. It's because Canada is starting with an approach of information campaigns. And so they have an ongoing information campaign about the safety of button cell batteries. And they certainly are not, they also have the power to, if there are incidents, if there is some reason that a particular product is proven to be unsafe, they just have the power to recall it, whether or not there is a standard, whether or not there is a rule. They can protect the safety of Canadians as a blanket power. But the trick with Canada is that any safety warning, including any button cell safety warning, that is included on the package or in the instructions, safety warnings all have to be translated into French. So anything that is required by Reese's Law or by the PAS or by the Australian standard, if you're selling in Canada, at minimum, the safety warning needs to be translated into French. And then, as there is one province in Canada that requires everything to be translated into French. So we've put together a little table so that we can compare. And this would be a good place to just start talking. Is there anything that you want to address about comparing these?
I was
I'm going
really
to start by letting
nervous
you know.
when you were making it, Bill. That's what I want to address. No. So we were really brave. I'm really proud of ourselves. So trying to put this in a table wasn't easy. But I think we've already mentioned it, right? The UL 420 seems to be a common denominator across them all. We're not saying it's the best. That's not what we're saying at all. And the fundamental thing is ensure your product's safe. Review your product, make sure it's safe. But we just thought there'd be a nice little summary here. We don't have much time today, but I thought this was really useful, just to summarize really quickly, right, Bill?
And we want to point out that all the places where we say that there are no button cell requirements, that's not true in the sense that there is a general requirement that everybody has to sell safe products.
Yeah, it's a
and so
question.
this is a good tool for doing that, because button cell
Yeah.
batteries are a real hazard.
it's a question that bugs me when people ask me, and I don't mean it in a bad way. I'm like, is it mandatory or not? There's very few standards from a European point of view that are actually mandatory, even harmonized, to be honest with you. But it's like, you need to do it, because if you don't, then you're going to get in trouble. So the kind of reverse burden point of view. But yeah, okay.
Right. And so, yeah, we put together a couple thoughts here that are just things you should keep in mind. And the first one is that be on the lookout for button and coin cells in your products. Um, they're small, they hide, you don't think about them. And so you have something that's a coffee maker, but whoops, it has a remote control. Or something where you've put lights or sounds in something that's not generally a powered item, like greeting cards, jewelry, a yo-yo, a slide, calipers. Uh, these are all items that are now containing button cell batteries. And I kind of want to reinforce the idea that even though the concern is the safety of children, the hazard doesn't come from just products children interact with. Button cell batteries are used all over the place. They get out and you don't notice it, you don't think about it, and kids eat them. And so that's why these are so all-encompassing. Even it's important to remember that even if your button cell battery is not removable, there are still probably labeling requirements that apply, and there are definitely testing requirements that apply to prove that it's still not going to come out, even if it's not intended to be removable. And then the last thing is, if you're in a larger organization, not everybody in the chain of developing a product, A, realizes that button cell batteries are a hazard, or B, really thinks about the fact that they're in there. So this is a good place for different organizations with, well, different teams within your organization to kind of be in contact and remind each other about the need for button cell safety. And then, yeah, the last piece is what I've been saying for half an hour, which is US is the strictest right now. But so it's possible to create a warning that meets everywhere else on Earth and still can't get into the US. And so that's what we've done here, is try to come up with something that for at least a lithium battery will meet the requirements of the US, the UK, can sell in Europe and Canada, although it would need to be in French in Canada, and meets the Australian requirements so long as it's a lithium battery. There is some question about whether a lab would pass, would let this pass for, one of the heavy metal, one of the other types, the button cells that we were calling them in the first section. Just because Australia has a separate call out, which is mentioned above if you are looking through this at a later time and want to rewind. But we think that this is a great starting place. And it's also important to remember that the details of your product in the end do matter. If you don't use box packaging, then you're going to have slightly different requirements for how big the warnings need to be and where they're allowed to be, if it's on a hang tag or if you are selling it in a plastic bag. And I fully expect that there's going to be a greater push for button cell warnings to appear online. I haven't noticed that so far, but as good practice, it's the kind of thing that we want to make more people aware of, the dangers of button cells as button cells become more prevalent.
And I think the toy safety regulations are coming out now in Europe. We haven't fully got them yet, hopefully by the end of the year, but I believe that's what they're saying, is that the information, everyone shops online, and you need to know at point of sale what you're getting. And I think that's really, really important. Again, I was quite nervous, but also a little bit excited. There's fine line between nervous and excited when Bill showed me this. I was like, really, do we have a solution here? But I think the point is a lab will interpret it. Lab interprets things differently. Of course, you have some countries that the lithium versus non-lithium and coin and button, they have a differentiation and a different label. So it's important to check your product and check the regions that you're selling to. But I think, this warning here seems to be the one that is recognized throughout, and there are a lot of options in some of the standards. So I think Bill did a great job here. We did a great job here, I think. We're at the end. We've only got 1 minute left, and there are 2 questions that have come in. I just want to quickly try and answer them. So one question is about a safe compartment. If it falls and it breaks, in my opinion, that's why you do use and abuse testing. I think that's really, really important. Whether the standard or the region you're looking at specifies that, it's a good thing to do anyway. Remember, standards are the minimum. Yeah, they should be the minimum. It's about you making sure your product's safe and how well it's made, etc. I don't know if you want to add to that, Bill. We've only not got long, but I want to ask another thing before I hand over to you for lasting comments. But somebody's asked about the CPSC and it being a bit of turmoil right now, which is a real shame. But is there any movement about bringing Reese's Law into toys? Do you know anything about that? So 2 questions I've asked you there to end the session.
Okay, so my understanding about Reese's Law is that the last I heard, the push was to add a few more physical requirements to the toy standard rather than force toys to comply with 4200A. So they are mentioned in Reese's Law, and they're mentioned to say that the toy standard applies to them. So that's where I have seen the push in the standardization. But I also don't, whatever craziness is going on with the CPSC, it doesn't seem like enforcement is decreasing as part of that. So, if anything, we're seeing more enforcement than we have at the sort of individual product and import level.
Yeah. I can see another.
In terms of the other one, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. Oh, and I want to agree with Al that yes, it absolutely exempts the F963 compliant toys, and that's part of it being mentioned. But that is because there is a similar robust use and abuse and labeling requirement. So it was thought of and intentionally left out.
And I think regarding the first point, just because we have run out of time now, but did you agree? So if the product falls and it breaks, I was saying about use and abuse testing, did you have anything to add on that? Or
No, I think you covered it great. That that if it
Good.
falls and it breaks, I mean, the concern is that the button cell batteries are getting out. That's what
Exactly.
really matters.
And this is so important, is understanding the use of your product and the lifespan of your product. How long is it going to be in someone's consumer home, and can it withstand that? For all safety reasons, I think it's really important. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure covering this topic. We know it's really complex. We've got the slide up here that has our information. If you want to contact us directly, please do. We're happy to help. And of course, contact ICW if you have any questions. We're really looking forward to seeing you in the next session. Anyone that's put questions in, we will get back to you individually. But otherwise, thank you so much for spending time with us. We know it's precious. And have a lovely rest of your day.
It's great seeing everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye. Bye.